Welcome back to Hi Ho Studios. We're here in the cave today with Darlene from the Schultz Creative. And Darlene, we're going to talk about reputation management and communication with podcasts.
Exactly. Thanks for having me. Two
So
of my
nice to
favorite
have you.
things.
Okay, good.
to talk about.
What is your background before we get into it?
Sure. So I got into corporate communication, kind of seen in different spaces in South Africa, but I studied the BCom version of that, undergrad, postgrad as well. I always knew I was fascinated with business, but I really wanted to be part of the people element of that and not so much on the spreadsheet side of it, all the numbers. I think communication just fit that niche. And then, life took me lots of different places. But at the end of the day, communication skills is something you use every single day.
Mm-hmm.
And especially in our space with our clients, applying those principles in terms of always thinking about your brand and their image and their message is so important for what we do.
Okay, so we have lots of challenges these days in terms of options for corporate communications. Why would you recommend to a client to make a podcast?
So let's backtrack into a little bit about reputation and companies and why it's so important. And so we have this equation that we talk about, which is the reputation equation. And that is basically it's performance plus behavior plus communication. And the idea is to have a positive reputation as a brand, you need to get all three of those right.
Okay.
Traditionally, PR was seen as, the spin doctor and you're manipulating the public and you're lying about who you are to make yourself look good. Kind of looking at before podcasts became so popular and before even social media, brands had very limited ways in which to communicate their performance and their behavior and who they are because there wasn't the space to be a human face, which is so important for trust, for authenticity, all these things. And that's why I love podcasts, because you as a brand can add a face or multiple faces to your company, to your name, and you have an opportunity to get to express who you are. That is not just through an advert that everybody already knows
you paid
for and you're intended. So you can generate really good PR without having to rely on a journalist or a PR release or whatever that looks like, a media release. Here you have control of your voice and you have control of what's being said about your brand. Yeah.
In a space also that you own entirely.
Exactly.
I think, traditional media has always been someone else's space. So like you say, we've purchased ad space that can say whatever it is we want. If we don't have great relationships with awesome journalists, we don't get that space either. And the podcast is completely owned by ourselves as a business. How do we go about the content side of things? Because if you're working with a journalist or you've got a wonderful story to tell, it's kind of easy to come up with a PR piece. Yeah. But now we're talking podcasts. We all know that those have multiple episodes. They're ongoing.
And people are only going to listen if they care, right?
Sure.
So, just talking about your brand is not going to cut it. That's maybe one episode. Absolutely. And that's where I think there's a combination of things that you can look at, that you can approach. Storytelling is extremely important. It is actually one of the tools communication specialists use in their toolkits. Your brand story, your origin, where it comes from, why it is what it is. That is a very powerful way of kind of introducing yourself to the audience out there. But the story element of that makes it entertaining, makes people interested, right? Because at the end of the day, I want to meet a human and I want to know what's behind. Why did you start the company? What challenges did you face? And again, that's an opportunity to be really authentic and to be really true to, hey, actually, it wasn't all sunshine and roses and I didn't just become a big brand overnight. And then, of course, thought leadership. I think it's been discussed on the podcast before, and it's such a big buzzword at the moment. But at the end of the day, you want to be seen by your customers as knowledgeable. Your customers want to know that your brand knows what they're doing.
I think one of the things that brands, when they're doing this really well, in telling their own story and avoiding that whole this is just a plug angle, bringing guests in that allow them to have credibility by proxy.
Yeah, definitely. And this is actually also part of what we call social capital within a company. So many companies focus obviously on their their assets, their
Mm-hmm.
economical capital.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I mean, obviously profit is important. That's the point of the business. And then you've got your human capital, a lot of investment into looking after your staff and upskilling them and taking care of them and so on. And so you've also got this social capital aspect. And the way I like to think, this is not in a textbook, but the way I like to think of it is it's almost like a piggyback, right? And you're putting you're building up your reputation. You're leaving a positive image in the minds of your customers and other listeners and viewers. And you're storing that up and you're creating this capital for yourself. So for the day when you need it, you've got it. You've built yourself a foundation, a good reputation that you can fall back on so that if there's a crisis, if there's someone in your company that posts something that they shouldn't, anything that can damage your brand, you have something to fall back on. And podcast is great for that, by people listening to and liking your podcast and just your general content that maybe doesn't have something directly to do with your brand. They get to know you and then they go, but I know that brand.
Yes,
I know those people.
There's a feeling of attachment that happens subconsciously.
Exactly. Yeah. Brand affinity, brand loyalty is the official terms for that attachment. And that is the ultimate goal for any company, for a marketing manager.
I don't know about you, but the podcasts that I listen to regularly, you start to feel like you know that person.
Exactly.
You listen to their voice enough times that you can hear emotion when they're speaking. And I think if you can get that right as a brand, you've found yourself into the hearts of your customers.
It's so true. And that's the thing. And that just creates this sense of camaraderie, and I'm more likely to believe the best of a brand when I see a negative headline because I'm like, I feel like I know the people. I don't know what the newspapers are saying. Like, I know the people.
Where they get their information.
Exactly. Yeah. And so that's kind of the thing that you want to create. Yeah. One thing that we do get from clients sometimes is that they are hesitant to build their brand around one face.
Okay. Yeah.
Which is understandable. Talent comes and goes, and it depends. And so there are ways around that. It's why we often do multiple hosts.
Okay.
And you can kind of have them interchange, or you can change out hosts for different seasons. So there are ways to do that where you're building your brand through your podcast content or your image. So there are ways to look at that.
And would you recommend that it's the executives that are utilized in the podcast? Is it better to have more outsiders sitting with company executives or?
Yeah, so I think this is very much it depends on the brand, and it depends on who your executives are. You obviously want somebody who's going to communicate well, somebody who can. I like to believe, or I'd hope that most brands have executives that deeply care about their brand and are very passionate about it. But some people are able to express that passion more openly than others, and so you want to put your best foot forward as a brand. So if you've got an executive that can communicate really well, then that's a great space to be in. Often executives' schedules are really limited, so it's tricky to get them in studio. So it depends, if you have maybe somebody that's not an executive, but maybe in one of your departments, but they may be younger or they have a really dynamic way of speaking, then they're maybe a good choice, or then to go the other way is to get somebody from outside that, is a paid talent, which is fine because you have in the contract that they're representing a brand and they've got certain standards that they need to adhere to. And you're also guaranteed then that you're going to get a good communicator. You're going to get the exact feeling of the podcast that you want. So there are multiple ways to go about it and to consider it. The other thing I get a lot from clients is that they sometimes don't want to put an employee that's maybe not an executive or an owner in the podcast because you always run the risk of the employee resigning.
They don't work here anymore.
Exactly. And that ultimately is a personal choice for the brands. For some brands, it's not such a big problem because if you're about investing in your people, then you want to pour everything you can into the people who are working for you currently. If that's your company culture, then that's great. Like at that time, they can be on the podcast or, and then they can move on. There are ways to mitigate risk in terms of contracts and what they're allowed to say and not say after they leave, things like that.
Sure.
But if it doesn't work for you, or if it makes you too uncomfortable, then don't go that route.
Again, I think this is the thing about podcasting and, other owned media within a business, is that you can develop something that matches what the brand stands for. And, obviously whatever the objectives are of the marketing team, that it flows within that.
Exactly.
And it's not sitting outside of what would feel right for the company. Darlene, something that really bothers me is if I have been listening to a couple of episodes of either a person who is a thought leader in a certain industry, or is a branded podcast, sometimes it starts to feel a little bit insincere. The constant plugs, the constant, this is how good we are. And I find it's a delicate balance, because part of the reason for the podcast is to help educate the customer, the potential customer, about how good we are and how knowledgeable we are. How do we navigate that fine line between just very pitchy and authentic, natural, passionate someone I actually want to listen to?
I think you're absolutely right. It's a fine balance. And I definitely would say, like, please don't create a podcast just to market yourself.
Yeah.
It's not. It comes across, absolutely, like you said, as insincere, and it's for some people it really puts them off.
Yeah.
So here and there, strategically bringing it in the messaging, absolutely. I think the biggest question to ask is, am I adding value? Like, you always want to ask, like, why do my viewers care? Why do my listeners care about what I'm saying, right?
What are you adding to their lives by them listening?
Exactly. And in the world where now podcasts are so popular, they have their choice of podcasts. And then another way that works is to have friends of the brand in whatever form that looks like. So sometimes that could be a paid influencer that is doing some other marketing activities for you, or whatever that you bring in to come in and talk. Because often if somebody else talks about the brand, it gives them that credibility, and then it's not so on the nose. But, also, again, very fine balance, very delicate. People are very sensitive to this idea of influencers and being paid to say nice things. But it is always a nice way to go about it, is have somebody else talk about it. My favorite way, which is trickier, but it's also great, is to have people who actually really do love your brand. And that will come in, and it's not a paid situation. You're really inviting them as a guest. You're inviting them for their knowledge and for kind of what they can add, the value they can add to the audience and to your listeners. And sometimes that it really does look like in the form of just personal relationships. So it's maybe not about the brand and their brand, but it's about me as the executive. I have a friend who's an executive in another company, but come and join my podcast. Let's have a conversation. Let's talk about some things that my audience will care about. Right. And then you really do love the brand. So it's not a lie. It's not a spin or a marketing message.
I feel like, that old adage of let someone else do your bragging for you.
Exactly.
Is a fantastic way to have good things said about your business or your brand without it coming out of your own lips.
Exactly.
Okay. What are the things that you would say to executives who don't necessarily understand the value of podcasts, or haven't been exposed to podcasts enough to understand how they fit into so many people's lives? What are the things that you would say to encourage them to participate in this kind of marketing?
Sure. So I think my first question would be for you to consider is think about where are my customers?
Right.
What are they doing? What do their day-to-day lives look like? So podcasts is so popular and people have fitted them into their lives, but different people have different ways of doing it. Like I know for me, I predominantly listen to my podcast in the car. So maybe because I'm a little bit younger, radio is not so big for me. So I listen to my podcast in the car. But with other people, if your customers is maybe moms or people who would be doing housework, or, so like if you're not doing daytime TV, you might be listening to a podcast. So where are your customers? What do they do? And how can you fit your brand naturally into the flow of their day?
And something that they've selected themselves.
Exactly.
I think this is something that I always feel needs to be part of the messaging of the marketing teams is that people are going out and seeking content themselves. When you listen to the radio, and I'm just pulling that example out of what you've just gone through there with other options out there for your listening. When you listen to the radio, someone else has made that selection of music. There's advertising in there. Obviously, you've probably selected the radio, the channel, but, it's not your own selection. Whereas with a podcast, when I'm choosing that content, I've gone out and sought either the topic or the genre, and I'm listening to it because I choose to. So why wouldn't you go and seek that out?
Exactly. And that's the thing, like you want to become a very attractive option in the list of options for them to choose. And so as an executive, like think about that. We have so many marketing avenues, but there's very few avenues where you can really truly be very authentic.
Yeah.
And it's that authenticity that builds trust with your brand.
Yeah.
So understand how important those intangible things are when it comes to customers and future customers. And then go and so that's what I would say is like, if you don't think podcasts are important, then what other ways are there that you're naturally going to fit into somebody's day and where they're going to choose you above anything else as their way to consume? So that's the big important thing. And then of course the stats I think speak for themselves, so have a look at that. It's a privilege to hold someone's attention in today's day and age. And I think if we as content creators can really understand that, like, I'm not just here to plug a brand or to have another podcast, but we want to create a space where we're going, it's really hard to get your attention, but we're going to make it worth your while. Give us your attention and we want to really add value.
Share some valuable content.
And I know I choose my podcast that way. Like, I find podcasts as a way to, if there's a topic that I don't know a lot about, or there's something that I'm like, oh, this would really benefit me to know. Like, I don't really want to read a book on it. I'll listen to a couple of episodes. And so different people have different kind of strategies and what they look for podcasts. In marketing, we're very clear on how we kind of segment our markets and targeting different markets for like in different ways. Marketing has kind of a long history of already kind of gaining that knowledge and that experience. And so the question you have to ask is, okay, we know podcasts are a tool, we know they work, but which market segmentation is this going to speak to? And just because it doesn't speak to that segment of your market doesn't mean you should throw out podcasts completely. They can still speak to another segment. I know of a very popular brand who actually run 3 podcasts, completely different podcasts. The one is completely women run. They've got 4 women on the panel and they talk about some topics. Another one is about young professionals. So you've got one host and guest coming in. Same brand,
right?
But those podcasts speak to 2 very different audiences
segments of their customer base,
which is their segments. And so that's something to keep in mind, I think. Yeah,
it's a great strategy.
Exactly.
You can tell me later who it is.
I will.
Thank you, Darlene. It's been so insightful to chat to you. I'm really looking forward to picking your brain a little further on guest management, if you have some time. But thanks so much for joining us today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.